This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
While I watch your interviews, I know how to do some interviewing.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said fine. I didn't negotiate with him. I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? One of the most important companies in the travel industry today is Airbnb. It started less than 2 decades ago as a concept of renting out one's room to make some extra money. Now, all over the world, people are renting out their homes, their apartments, to other people. I actually used an Airbnb recently in Alaska and found it to be quite a good experience. I sat down with Brian Chesky, who conceived of Airbnb and has now built it into one of the largest travel companies in the world. When you came up with the idea with your partners of starting this company around 2007, 2008, did anybody tell you it was a good idea?
No, I mean, it was pretty universally considered a terrible idea. I remember the first person I told the idea to, I said, hey, we've got this idea. We're going to build this website where strangers could host other strangers in their homes. And the person who was kind of somebody I looked up to in Los Angeles, he looks at me with a straight face. I said, yes. He said, Brian, I hope that's not the only idea you're working on. And that was, by the way, one of the nicer things people said. But the reason I think it worked was because I stumbled into this idea with my roommate. I mean, there was this design conference coming to San Francisco in October 2007. I couldn't afford to pay rent. This design conference coming to San Francisco, all the hotels were sold out. And we had this idea. We said, why don't we just turn our house into a bed and breakfast for a design conference? I didn't have any beds, but Joe had 3 air beds. We pulled them out of the closet and we called it airbedandbreakfast.com. We made enough money to pay our rent, but more importantly, we actually ended up making friends with these 3 people because they lived with us for a week. And at that point, I think we realized if people could experience what we experienced, that this would be an idea that would spread around the world. But little did I know that it was going to be a very difficult uphill road.
So where did you get your initial money? Was that the Y Combinator from Paul Graham?
Well, actually, there's kind of a weird story about how we raised money. So we had this kind of quirky idea to sell collectible breakfast cereal. So Barack Obama, John McCain are both running for president. And we thought, you know, the breakfast isn't selling we're a bed and breakfast. We're not selling beds. Maybe we can sell breakfast. And so we started selling collectible breakfast cereal, a Barack Obama themed cereal called Obama O's, which is like Cheerios, and we called it the Breakfast of Change. And we learned about John McCain was a captain in the Navy, so we called it Captain McCain's, a maverick in every bite. And we made these really funny looking cereal boxes. We actually ended up selling $30,000 worth of collectible breakfast cereal, and that was actually originally how we funded the company. So now it's late 2008, we're like desperate. We've launched 3 times. No one's using it. I'm hot gluing cereal boxes in my kitchen. I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs ever had to hot glue cereal boxes in their living room. The answer was no. They hadn't done it. This was a foreboding sign. And I'm going out to dinner at a Thai restaurant in San Francisco with the founders of Justin.tv who are in Y Combinator. And they said, you should join Y Combinator because you guys are dying. And I thought, well, it's probably too late. We already launched. But Paul Graham eventually allowed us to apply. We actually missed the deadline, but he allowed us to apply after the deadline. And we got an interview, and that's when Paul Graham said, like, in our first question, people are actually doing this? And I said, yes. And he goes, what's wrong with them? So the interview kind of went downhill from there. He admitted he hated the idea of Airbnb at first, or didn't get it. But as we're leaving the interview, my roommate, Joe, hands him a box of Barack Obama cereal that we made. And he looks at it and he goes, what is this? Why am I getting this? And we said, this is how we funded the company. And he looks to us and he said, if you can figure out how to get people to pay $40 for a $4 box of cereal, maybe you will convince them how to sleep in each other's homes. So Y Combinator let us in the program. I think I don't know if we got in, barely got in. And the moment we got into the program, you know, the recession is occurring. People are desperate to save their homes. And a lot of people started turning to Airbnb to save their homes by renting them out. At the same time, you have a great recession, which is causing a lot of young people to feel like, oh, I need to save money. You know, Facebook and social media is growing, so people are comfortable meeting people on the internet. And it was kind of this supernova of forces that led to an opening for Airbnb to finally take off.
So traditionally, people might build a company like yours, and 5 or 6 years later, they would take it public and liquefy for the employees, the founders, and also the investors. But you were resisting pressure to do that. Why didn't you go public sooner? And you have any regrets about not going public sooner than you did?
I just didn't feel like we were ready to go public sooner. And I think in hindsight, maybe we could have gone public sooner. I mean, just it's important to remember when we were growing really quickly, there were not regulations on the books for Airbnb. And a lot of people were wondering, well, is this business going to get regulated out of existence? That to me was one of many existential questions. Eventually, we were able to get laws in the books in nearly every big city in the world. We were able to collect $4 billion of hotel tax, became legitimate. We expanded internationally. We built an executive team. But I felt like going public was a big stage. It's almost like, you know, if you're, I don't know, there's a kind of a weird analogy, but if you're like baking a cake, going public is putting it in the oven. In other words, it's hard to change the ingredients after you go public, right? And so I wanted to make sure that everything was kind of baked before we went public. Now, once the pandemic hit, that was more than a decade after we started, I was accused of having waited too long and having missed the IPO window. I would have never imagined what had transpired over the course of 2020, but I think looking back, it worked out really well for everyone.
Well, you went public in December of 2020 after the pandemic, but you obviously were you had to lay off some people during that period of time. Is that right?
You know, like when the pandemic hit, I was working on our S1. And like many people, I came back from the holidays in 2019 thinking my life was going to go in one direction, not realizing our entire world was about to get rocked. I felt like a captain of a ship and a torpedo hit the side. We lost 80% of our business in 8 weeks, and we were doing tens of billions of dollars a year in bookings. And then suddenly we go from high flying to people predicting, is this the end of Airbnb? I mean, there were multiple mainstream journalists predicting that we were going to go out of business. It was almost like our business flashed before our eyes. And I ended up having to confront this reality, David, that I realized we were going to lose half our business. And so it's like running into a burning house. If you can only save half your furniture and half your stuff, what do you take with you? And I said, we're going to get back to the original idea of Airbnb, the individual people that are sharing their homes and experiences all over the world. We had to make the hardest decision I ever made, which is we had to lay off 25% of our workforce, nearly 2,000 employees. But I wanted to make sure even in a layoff, we could show compassion and be really principled. So we ended up giving people a year of health care. We were, I think, very generous in our severance.
So when you went public in December of 2020, you priced the IPO, or the underwriters did, at half of the price that it ultimately ended up that day. So some people might say you left $23 or $4 billion on the table. Do you look at it that way, or you think it was mispriced, or you're okay with it?
We came back from 2019 as somewhere between, on the private markets, a $30 to $40 billion valuation. At the depth of the pandemic, our valuation was below $18 billion. I mean, we probably would have struggled to raise money at an $18 billion valuation. We had warrants. And to be able to be a $100 billion company 8 months or 7 months after that low point, it was really hard to imagine any of that was going to happen. And I think part of the reason our stock popped was I believe we had hundreds of thousands of people in retail trying to buy our stock. So I don't feel bad. I never took the highest price in any round. We totally could have priced it higher. But it was pretty hard, I think, at the time to foresee that this was going to be a company that was going to reach a valuation like that.
Now, as we talk, you've just reported your earnings for last quarter and last year, and they were record earnings, record revenues, and so forth. And you said, I think at the release, that COVID has changed everything. People are changing the way they work and the way they travel. Can you explain what you mean?
I think the world is never going back to the way it was fully before the pandemic. And one of the changes, I think, David, has been a change in how we work. You know, for many people, not all, but many people had a job at an office. They're not going to be required to come back to the office 5 days a week. And I don't think CEOs per se are going to determine these policies. I think workers will, because all of us CEOs, I think, want the best talent. And I think flexibility is going to be the second most important benefit after compensation. So I think we're now living in a world where many people are going to work remotely. They might go into office, but not 5 days a week. If you don't have to go into office 5 days a week, you're more flexible. You're less tethered to any one city. And so I think what that means is that for millions of people, they can now live anywhere. Some people that don't have kids, like me, can literally live nomadically. You can stay city to city hopping around. I think a lot of young people and retirees will do that. All of this, David, has culminated in Airbnb not just being a company about traveling, but now a company about living. What people don't realize is half of our nights booked are for stays of longer than a week. A fifth of our nights booked are for stays of longer than a month. So there's this whole new category of travel that's not classic 2-3 nights in a city. It's not long-term housing, and it's completely emerged because of the pandemic.
Let's go back to your background for those who don't know your background. What part of the United States are you from?
I'm from a small town in upstate New York called Niskayuna, which is a suburb of Schenectady outside of Albany.
And your parents, they were social workers?
Yep, my mom and dad were social workers. Both my grandfathers worked for General Electric, but my mom and dad were kind of lived normal lives as social workers.
And when you were growing up, I understand you wanted to be a hockey player when you were young. Is that true?
Yeah, when I was 5 years old, that would have been 1986. Wayne Gretzky was the greatest hockey player in the world, and I wanted to be just like him. I had posters of Wayne Gretzky on my wall. The problem with athletics is your dreams come crashing down pretty quickly. By the age of 6, I realized I wasn't going to be Wayne Gretzky.
Okay, well, so when that dream went away, you decided you might want to be an artist because you had good skills in that area?
Exactly. I ended up getting a scholarship to go to Rhode Island School of Design, and they only gave away a few scholarships, so it was kind of a big deal to get the scholarship. And my mom said, like, well, my mom and dad said, you can go to art school, but you got to promise me that you one day get a real job. And I said, well, what's a real job? She said, a real job is a job that gives you health insurance. And I said, okay, I promise I'm going to go to RISD, and one day I'm going to get a real job with health insurance. That was kind of my ambition. I mean, my high school yearbook quote literally was, I'm sure I'll amount to nothing. I think I was being kind of sarcastic, but I didn't really think I was going to be a tech founder. I mean, I didn't really see very much beyond my small town.
So let's talk about it. You graduate from Rhode Island School of Design, and then you moved to California, Los Angeles, to become a designer. So then you ultimately didn't like it that much and you decided to move to San Francisco. Is that right?
I liked it for like 3 months because there's like a thrill. When you're a student, nothing you make is real, and you just have this yearning that you want to make something that's real, that's on a shelf and people pay money for. But then after a few months of doing that, or maybe a year, I kind of remember thinking, I was like 24, maybe 25 years old. I remember like feeling like I could see the rest of my life. And the rest of my life looked like a road that disappeared on the horizon, and it looked exactly like the road behind me, and it kind of terrified me. I was like, I don't really want to just be a designer. I, at this point, realized I think I want to be an entrepreneur, but I don't know what I'm going to build or what I'm going to start. And this is now 2007. And so I think like the internet revolution was really taking hold. YouTube was just sold to Google. It was kind of the biggest company. Facebook was rising. The tech had come out of the ashes of the dot-com crash. And it just felt like the gears of the world were starting to turn in San Francisco. And so I just had this premonition that like, I have to come to San Francisco. It's pulling me.
All right, so you started the company with your roommate, Joe,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
You brought a third partner in?
Yeah, so really not long after, it was just Joe and I. We're both designers, so we can design a website, but we can't actually code and build a website. You need a software engineer to do that. And so after we host these 3 guests, I looked to Joe and I said, like, who's the best engineer you know? And Joe said, well, it's funny you ask, because there was an engineer who used to live with me before you moved into the house with me named Nate. And so the 3 of us got together and we said, what if you could build a website where you can book someone's home the way you can book a hotel anywhere in the world? And that was the original vision. Little did I know how hard it was going to be to get it off the ground, but that was a pretty simple idea.
So as you look back on what you've built, what would you say is the best decision you made, and what was the biggest regret you have so far in what you built?
The most important piece of advice I ever got was when I first started Airbnb. It was actually Paul Graham. He told me something. He said, it's better to have 100 people love your service than have 1 million people that are kind of like your service but a little apathetic. He should start with a small group and perfect your product. Do things that don't scale. Turn them into advocates, because if those 100 people love your service, they're going to tell everyone about them. They're going to become your marketing. And it's easy to improve your service when you only have 100 customers. When you have 1 million customers, it's really hard to change it. And so do things that don't scale. Go above and beyond. And that was something we did, and I think that really helped explain why we were so successful. I think the biggest mistake I made was when you're in your 20s and you never imagined being an entrepreneur and suddenly you're a multi-billion-dollar company and somebody gives you billions of dollars and you hit on something that's hugely successful, you tend to start to believe that you can do anything. And you try to do everything. You try to do everything at the same time. And before the pandemic, we had like 10 divisions and we were extending all different places. And in hindsight, I think having too much money is sometimes worse than having not enough money. Because I think not having enough money creates constraints, it creates discipline, it creates focus, it forces you to create trade-offs. I think when corporations and startups get overcapitalized, they can avoid making tough decisions. The accountability goes down. There's a real sense of complacency that goes into the company. And I think a little of that lack of focus happened to Airbnb before the pandemic.
So you have a lot of mentors that have helped you over the years. How did you get to know Barack Obama, and is he staying at Airbnbs?
He has stayed in Airbnbs, actually. You might recall that we lifted the embargo in Cuba when he was president. President Obama ended up going to Havana, Cuba, and he wanted to bring American businesses with him to show that business is now open between US and Cuba. Well, the problem is there weren't really any US businesses in Cuba except for Airbnb. So I went with him to Havana. I got to know him and we kept in touch. And so I think it was just helpful to have somebody who could help me see the world in a broader way and just think a little more systematically about my decisions and the consequences those would have on society. So that's really how he became very helpful to me.
For somebody that's young, what is the advice about how you would recommend they build a company?
The first thing I'd say is don't listen to your parents. Most of them are going to try to talk you out of crazy things, but sometimes the crazy ideas are the ones that do kind of spread around the world.
Now, as I understand it, you're spending a year or so going to Airbnbs around the United States?
Yeah, mostly United States, kind of reasonable time zone.
So when you want to book an Airbnb, do you have a trouble getting a place where you want to go, or?
No, there's 6 million homes to choose from, so I've got more than enough options. I don't really say who I am. Sometimes they find out, sometimes they don't. But I kind of just book last minute. I was in Atlanta, Nashville, Charleston, Los Angeles, now Miami. I need ideas for where to go next.
So when you book on an Airbnb, do you do it yourself, or do you have a team of people that pick it for you?
I do it myself. I gotta see what everyone else is doing. I mean, I always feel like people who build great products ideally are building products they themselves want to use. I also think there's only so many things you see in the data. You have to just have a feel for the product, and so I try to use it as much as I can.
I always wonder, who sets the rate? Do you set the rate at Airbnb, or does the host set the rate, and do you negotiate rates?
No. The host sets what rate. They can charge whatever they want, from $10 to $10,000 a night or beyond. And we have people renting luxury villas that are incredible, like 20,000 square feet luxury villas. And then we have people renting little spaces in their backyard. I mean, we had in 2009, I remember when we first launched, we had people renting spaces under their kitchen table because they kind of thought, oh, it's space, I can rent any kind of space. So it's kind of everything from a couch to a castle and everything in between. And they set the rate, and we basically take 15%.
So when you stay at a place, do you ever call up the host and say, by the way, you're charging too much or charging not enough?
I try to give feedback less on the value, but more on the kind of hospitality. Like sometimes a host will want me to go through some, they'll give me a rental contract because they're used to doing it on their websites. And I'm like, Airbnb is the contract. You don't need to do this. But it would be pretty weird to be a tech founder of Airbnb and saying, hey, I think you're overcharging me. It would just kind of send a slightly weird message. But I try to give them feedback. And we have a review system. 70% of guests and hosts review each other at the end of the stay. So I try to write a pretty detailed review for every host. I try to be positive but honest about the reviews.
But you sign it BC or Brian Chesky?
Brian Chesky. So they know by the time I leave a review who I am. I'd say half the time they know who I am when I book. The other half I don't. I don't want to be a secret shopper where I'm lying to them and then booking under a pseudonym. But I also don't want to tell them who I am I'm expecting special treatment because then I'm not going to get the real experience. So about half the time they know who I am, half they don't. But it's a pretty fun experience.
You're 40 years old.
Yeah.
So at 40, you've already achieved more wealth than almost anybody could possibly imagine. Have you thought about stepping back and smelling the roses or doing something else with all the money you have?
No, I feel like it's really just getting fun now. I mean, it was fun when I started, And then like there was this like corporate adolescence, which was kind of painful, the growing of the company. But I'm having so much fun right now. And if I were to step back, I'd probably only do that to start another company, to spend another 10 years just to get back to this place. So when you've got a good thing going, you want to keep going. And I just feel like, I have so much I still want to do with the company. I think there's like a lot of loneliness in the world. And I think part of our bigger contribution is to help try to bring people together around the world, live in communities. So that's what I'm focused on.
Now, the company that I started and built had two partners with me for the entire 30 plus years, and we're still together. It's hard to have three people work together for a long time. You've had three people working together for quite some time as well. Don't you ever have fights with each other or get jealousies, or how do you work together so well?
It's a great question, David. Yeah, I mean, we're one of the only companies in the world as valuable as we are in tech that have three founders that have been together for 14 years. I think it's a couple things. Number one, I'm really lucky because I had the gift of having two incredible co-founders that are really high integrity, and they always put the company before themselves, and they were very supportive of me as CEO. But the other thing is we had a principle. We said we're never going to allow being right to get in front of the relationship. Like, if you try to be so principled that you try to win every single argument, you'll kind of see the trees and lose the forest, which is to say that we knew this company would only survive if it had a really strong founding team intact. And that means that occasionally each of us are going to have to kind of make compromises. So we tried to never let debates go so far that winning an argument got in the way of the relationship. I think that made a big difference.
So on philanthropy, giving away money sounds like it's easy, but it takes time to do it well. So how are you thinking about that? Are there certain areas you want to give away some of the money? You've committed to give away half of your net worth, but you have to take time to do it.
So for me, I wanted to join the Giving Pledge in my 30s because I thought, the main reason was, even though I wasn't at that point ready to give away all my money, I did want to set an example, if to the extent that I could, for the next generation of entrepreneurs, it's like redistribute the majority of wealth back to society seemed like a reasonable thing to do, was better for everyone. But I didn't know what I wanted to focus on. I did write in my Giving Pledge letter, though, that one of the issues that I want to focus on is just helping maybe create scholarship programs, helping young kids like me. I wasn't poor, I wasn't underprivileged, I was just kind of obscure middle class. But had it not been for a series of people in my lifetime, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. You would have just never heard of me, and I would have never left my town. And so I think that so many kids have untapped potential, like me, that their teachers would have never probably predicted would have had the journey that I've had. And I want to help kids see their unrealized potential and maybe help them change the trajectory of their lives. So that's maybe one area I'm passionate about. But make no mistake, there's a lot of other things I'd like to learn about and be able to help.
Final question. For somebody that's younger than you, if they want to be the next Brian Chesky, what is the advice about how you would recommend they build a company?
I would say a couple things. The first thing I'd say is don't listen to your parents. Don't take career advice from your parents. I love my parents. They want what's best for me. But, your parents, and when I use parents for proxy for anyone wise and old, most of them are going to try to talk you out of crazy things, but sometimes the crazy ideas are the ones that do kind of spread around the world. The second thing I'd say is probably solve your own problem. A lot of people are looking for markets. We weren't looking to go into a good market. We were just trying to solve our own problem. If you solve your own problem, you may have just solved the problem for millions of other people, and it might be quite marketable and monetizable. I think the last thing I'd say is just like focus on love. It sounds like a weird thing, but I think a business is really simple. Build a company people love working for that creates something people love consuming or using. I just think I don't want to say it's so simple, but it kind of is. It all comes back to passion.